All right, constant readers, 1983 or 2017, what you got? Long days and pleasant nights. Fellow travelers along the path of the beam, I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime En Fuego, and if it please you join me here for a bit of palaver on to Stephen King. That is Reezy, everybody, and you can just call me Fuego for short if for whatever reason you were stumbling upon this video where I did over 300 episodes of Hail to Stephen King on the horror show. And well, technically it started in 2016 with a little like backdoor pilot episode which was all about celebrating Sai King's 69th birthday. But yes, things didn't really get going in full force until 2017. And so 2017 was the year that I proudly proclaimed as the return of the king, so to speak, because while he had remained in prominence with his constant readers and, you know, always seeing his new releases, you know, like hit the New York Times at least for, you know, a little bit of noise, so on and so forth, he had kind of fallen out of like the mainstream, I suppose, of like just popular culture and things of that nature, yet remained prolific as ever, you know, putting something out just about every year, pretty much every year, sometimes twice a year, man. I mean, the fact that at his age, in his mid-70s now, he is still just churning them out. I mean, later this year we have You Like It Darker, which is coming out in May, which I'm very excited about. It's a collection of short stories, some previously released, and including some new ones like Rattlesnakes, which is a kind of epilogue sequel sort of sorts, as he has described it, to Cujo, which I actually just reread for a class that I took at Arizona State University, which was all about the literature of Stephen King. And so that when I was doing this show for all of those years at the horror show, that's where my time was significantly more freed up, because since returning to do film and media studies at Arizona State, I decided, you know, at the end of my 30s, I'm like, hey man, I'm gonna go back to school and try to get a different degree than the one that I previously had, which was in audio production technology. So I just finished for the spring A semester that literature of Stephen King class, so that's gonna be a separate video, okay? But the reason I give all of that information is because that's why Hail has been a sporadic thing over the course of the last year or so, in comparison with where it was weekly and sometimes twice a week for durations of time back when it was at the horror show. I'm still very much a part of the horror show. We have a review of Dune Part 2 that's coming very soon later this week. We also have reviews of Lisa Frankenstein, ISS, Night Swim, you know, a few different of the horror releases that have come out so far this year. So very much still a part of that, but Hail is over here based on, you know, scheduling and just kind of trying to find some time wherever I can. And so 2017, Return of the King, obviously, there were so many different Sai King things that were going down that year as far as both books, television, film, and yet I feel like there is a year that rivals the amount of input from just, and output, you know, from just adaptations and from King himself. And that is, if I'm going to age myself, and I suppose I must, it's the year I was born, 1983. And so 1983 versus 2017 as far as the prolificness of those particular years, with everything Sai King and Sai King adjacent that was being released, like how just ingrained into the public consciousness he actually was. And so I have covered all of these different releases over the course of time on the horror show for Hail to Stephen King. And so every book that I am going to just, you know, gloss over, give some release information about, you know, some numbers, so on and so forth, I have done full-fledged videos about every single one of these things, whether it's television, you know, films, or book releases. And so I'll try to link some of those, some of the, you know, more prominent ones. But so I guess we should probably start from the start as far as, you know, well, first and foremost, my start, but also, in my estimation, 1983 being the year where, you know, there was the preamble of King really getting things going with, you know, the paperback rights to Carrie, obviously, being the big thing that jump-started his career, and then, you know, a few years later, the film rights getting together, Brian De Palma making that film with Sissy Spacek. But, I mean, King was... he was gaining a name, and he was, but yet, I don't know if he was quite the king of horror, not just yet. Like, he was climbing that tower, right? You know, he was ascending the steps, so to speak, but I really feel like he was properly crowned in 1983 because this was a year that he had he had 3 different films come out in 1983, and then he also had 3 different books. Now, technically, one of them was just a very limited hardcover release, so we'll get to that in a second, but this is the year, being 1983, that I really think all of the momentum, just the surge in his popularity really hit its zenith. It's almost like where he plateaued, so to speak. And that's not to say that when you plateau, you immediately go down. No, that's where he hit the pinnacle and then he just kind of kept on going, man. You know, he was at top of his game by 1983. And it also includes the release of what, in my estimation, is his scariest book. And so, yeah, if we're going to just go through the year as it actually panned out. So, interestingly enough, the year started out with the release of none other than, you saw it in the thumbnail, but this baby, Christine. And so this is an interesting coming-of-age story that is divided up into, you know, the different just variations of what happens with Arnie. And just, man, it's such a great book, and one that initially I was a little more ho-hum on because of the fact that I'm a little more ho-hum on the John Carpenter adaptation, which actually came out the same year, so we'll discuss that here briefly in a second. But yeah, so this is what kicked off the year. So was the release of Christine on April 29th, and so yeah, divided up into 3 different sections, obviously. It's a fascinating read because you get so much more of the pathos into the progression of Arnie, you know, just the dissolution of his friendship, but also it's a lot different as far as like Christine the book is a possession, like the possession of a car sort of thing, whereas the film kind of streamlines it, and it's just like, oh, this is an entity, but it's a car that's alive. Whereas in the book itself, you get much more just, I guess, you know, in depth, sort of just delving into, you know, what actually brought this car to life, who brought this car to life, who is actually possessing this car, which is a former owner and stuff. And so, you know, once again, this is a book that I was a little more ho-hum on initially, but when I did an anniversary read a few years ago, it's got one of King's best and most chilling endings, gotta say. So, Christine, and yet one of the only times where a book came out, and this shows the popularity that he had hit by this particular point in 1983. The book came out early in the year, in April, and then later in the year, in August, which was actually, no, excuse me, it wasn't until December, so we'll get to that in a second, that this came out, because I'm trying to hit this chronologically. But yeah, so to have the book come out, and then later in the year, the film adaptation. So that means that King already had the film rights presumably sold before the book even hit publication. So he was at that point where, you know, I mean, this is commonplace now for, you know, King has a new book coming out, or like right when it comes out, the film rights are immediately snatched up. Unfortunately, a lot of the time now, we have stuff that is like the rights get snatched up and something is immediately announced, and then we never hear shit about it. I mean, they announced what Lucy Liu was going to be in a series about later, right when it was published, and nothing, donuts, crickets, you know, since, 2022, I think was when later came out, if I remember correctly, 21 or 22, somewhere around there. So, yeah, that's what seems to happen now. Same with The Institute, where they were like, oh, it's going to be an AMC television series. We haven't heard jack about that. So, you know, I really look at, you know, King adaptations with, you know, a lot of skepticism until I hear, like with the case of Life of Chuck, you know, Mike Flanagan's upcoming film with Tom Hiddleston, where it's like, okay, I know that is actually coming because they have wrapped production. But then again, that's even still like the slightest bit of gray area, because look what happened to Salem's Lot, and the fact that who knows if we'll ever see that Gary Doberman film with what's going on at Warner Brothers right now, but I think that's more so a Warner Brothers thing than a snatching up rights to King adaptation sort of thing. So April 29th, that's when we had the release of the aforementioned Christine, which has grown on me over the years significantly. Then in August, August 12th to be specific, we had the release of, let's get to my physical copy of it, the release of Cujo. Yes, and so Cujo, starring Dee Wallace, an iconic performance, a controversial change to a much darker ending from the source material, but I think this is a very strong adaptation. Cujo was actually one of the books that they asked us to read for the literature of Stephen King class at Arizona State that I had mentioned, and I did find some things in it that were significantly more intriguing from a supporting character standpoint, and I'll get into that. I'll just tease that for the video that is going to basically chronicle my time in that class now that that class is officially over. I thought about talking about it as I was taking it, but I don't know. I didn't want to compromise the process. I didn't want to, because people pay significant money, even though I'm scholarshiped to do this. Yeah, people pay a lot of money for these university classes, and so I didn't want to put myself in some sort of compromising position where I could get myself in trouble talking about the curriculum, but hey, I feel like I can freely discuss now that it's over. So, yeah. August 12th, we had this come out, and so it was a budget of $6 million for Cujo, and it had a return of over $21 million. So, you know, that's obviously a success. They say that, at least in this day and age in Hollywood, you have to take the budget and kind of slice the budget in half, because that's typically how they go about with marketing purposes. And with King in '83 being the biggest name in horror, I guarantee that that was probably what went about. But even with a $9 to $10 million budget, the fact that they still doubled that with over 20 million, highly successful. And so there you go. I know there's a few different editions of Cujo out. I know there's a 20th anniversary. This is the 25th anniversary here on Blu-ray. So we got that right there. And so that was August 12th. And then the very, just a couple months later, we had the release of, in my estimation, one of the absolute best adaptations that has ever been done for a Sai King novel. And that's The Dead Zone. That's right. So this came out on October 21st. So despite being more of a slice of Americana sort of story and less full-blown horror, this is more like, I guess, science fiction fantasy with a sprinkling of horror, obviously because of the Frank Dodd stuff, you know. But, you know, the back half with Stillson and everything, that's where it really veers into the more, you know, psychological drama with some political slants to it, obviously, too. A story, in my estimation, that is far more prescient with some of the more recent things that have transpired in our nation. But Christopher Walken is so tremendous in this, directed by David Cronenberg in a pivot away from his typical body horror. They have already remade this as a television series with dude from Breakfast Club, who was also in Evil Dies Tonight! Ugh, yeah, Halloween Kills is trash. But, so, in any event, Anthony Michael Hall, I believe, is the name of the actor. So, they're actually talking now about doing another film version. So, they're gonna pull a Carrie with this shizzle. Although, they were also talking a few years ago about they were gonna do a Carrie film that was gonna be more of the LGBTQ plus community. I think it was gonna be like a trans Carrie or something like that, which, you know, from a bullying standpoint, I can certainly understand, but I'm not trying to open up a can of worms about, you know, stuff that is briefly announced and then we don't hear a single peep about after the fact. I guess, you know, The Dead Zone is one with the much more heftily contentious nature of American politics currently, where they could do this again, but I don't know, man. It's probably going to be significantly more divisive than it was in 1983 on October 21st when this fantastic, excellent film came out. So there you go. So that was October, and then the following month in November, this is where we had our heavy hitter, everybody. Maybe my favorite Stephen King book, I don't know, but this was the drawer book, as many people know. It was so effed up that King was like, nah, man, I do not want to just relive thinking about the death of my child and the madness that I would potentially spin into if something this horrifying ever transpired. So it was released on November 4th in 1983, and yeah, this is part of the unholy trinity for me, which is also including It and The Stand. In my estimation, those are the three best Stephen King books, and then right after that, it's some Dark Tower stuff. It's really tough for me with the Tower, you know, being a Tower junkie of sorts, but it's either Wastelands or, you know, Wizard and Glass. So those are probably a tie for 4, Salem's Lot probably 5. I've done videos about this once again, and yeah, the Stephen King themed playlist on the Horror Show channel is where you can see all of that if you're just stumbling upon this video. But man, Pet Sematary is so exceptional, especially how he begins the second portion of it, which is the actual Pet Cemetery itself. I should have bookmarked this as opposed to just trying to scan through, but it's one of the most messed up passages. And actually, no, it's part 2, the Micmac Burying Ground, where he talks about it's probably wrong to believe there can be any limit to the horror which the human mind can experience. On the contrary, it seems that some exponential effect begins to obtain as deeper and deeper darkness falls. As little as one may like to admit it, human experience tends in a good many ways to support the idea that when the nightmare grows black enough, horror spawns horror. One coincidental evil begets another, often more deliberate evils, until finally blackness seems to cover everything. Man, it's one of King's best. It's not going to have as much of a dedication aspect to it as trying to go through The Stand or It, despite being 2 of his other most prolific ever. But 1983, man, maybe my favorite King book, and it was released on November 4th. So then we get into something that was also released in November, and so I almost hesitated to even make mention of this, but it technically was being Cycle of the Werewolf released in 1983. And so it was actually put out as a hardcover by Land of Enchantment, and that is a hardcover, you know, despite, you know, Tower first editions and, you know, all these other things. I have all of the awesomeness over there, sorry, from Cemetery Dance, you know, the versions of It and Salem's Lot and Carrie, different things like that. All of my very just coveted collectibles. Man, the hardcover of Cycle of the Werewolf is one that I have always wanted, but unfortunately it is like insanely difficult to obtain. Now, it was re-released to a mass market in paperback form, which is what I have right here in 1985. But, so that does make it 3 different King books. So for those who were in the know and probably part of like a King fan club or, you know, just, it was so much tougher in the days before the internet, right? Because you had to have some sort of way to find out that something like that was even being released. But I love this book. It's, I think, maybe one of the only werewolf books offhand that King has ever done. And I don't, nothing else is ringing a bell. But yeah, it's broken into 12 different months, and it was adapted into Silver Bullet with the dearly departed Corey Haim, and then you also have a batshit crazy Busey in that film. I actually, up there on the shelf, I have the other release, which was the script for this, that also has the novella in it as well. So yeah, so that makes 3 different King book releases in the year of 1983. And so, you know, one thing I forgot to mention was the box office of The Dead Zone was another success, just like Cujo. So The Dead Zone was actually made for a few $1 million more, being, you know, a more prolific director like David Cronenberg. He probably dictated that. So the budget for that was estimated between 7 to 10 million. So definitely, you know, more, especially back in 1983 for a mass market feature film. But it also had returns of estimates between 16.3 and 20.8 million. So once again, just like with Cujo, somewhere in the same range of budget and somewhere in the same range of profitability. So yeah, we're talking doubling down already with what had been done in 1983 with regards to Sai King. And then the last release that year is the adaptation of Christine that I already gave a little hint about. So this came out at the end of the year. So, you know, one interesting thing about King and his team is they very wisely gave everything room to breathe. The fact that April was when the Christine book came out, and yet November was when the Pet Sematary book came out. So lots of breathing room between those actual print releases. And then even between the films, August, October, December. So, you know, there's like enough time for each of them to kind of have their day in the sun, you know, chill for a couple of months, get as much box office as possible. Because unlike in this current day and age where I saw Lisa Frankenstein was only in theaters for 2 weeks and it's already being snatched out of most of them. It's going to be on the VOD and home release very soon. So that's just the nature of the beast now. Unless you see significant success quite quickly, you're gone, man. And yet these films were able to just chill and keep on chug-a-lugging along, keep on driving, in the case of Christine, directed by John Carpenter, released on December 9th. This one, similar to The Dead Zone, had a $10 million budget, and similar, like these numbers, the fact that they're so eerily identical is interesting because the estimated box office back in '83 for Christine was also $21 million. And so that makes it a total box office for Sai King in that particular year of $62 million box office. And yeah, those are interesting factoids. And if you're gonna pull a Dan Murrell, a guy that I like to watch all the time on YouTube, he used to be with Screen Junkies and he's been solo for a while now, but he likes to do the altered for inflation. And so the $62 million of box office that Sai King had in 1983, if we did the little box office adjustment for modern doll hairs, we would have it up to almost $192 million in box office for Sai King if we're talking American money here in 2024, approximately $191,986,000 dollars. And so, yeah, guys, that was just how prolific King was. And so, just to let you know, so this is me presenting the information, then I'm going to present 17, and then we're going to have a little like argument, counter-argument sort of thing. And I don't even know, I'm still, even as of this filming, wondering which one was prolific in a more just, I don't know, massive manner, so to speak. Now, as we take a brief little break, I'm gonna sip on my little Pennywise man here. Get some of that coffee down. So then we come to the return of the king. So we had, like, you know, the king taking his throne, so to speak, in 1983. And then, of course, we have the return of the king. Yes, no Lord of the Rings references going on here. Yep, cut it out, Fuego. But, yeah, man, 2017, what a prolific year. And that is because not only did we have 2 different books released that year, both being collaborations, ironically enough, which is kind of interesting, but it was also the first year that I got to actually see Stephen King in person. Bam! He was doing a book tour with his son Owen for a release that I will be talking about here in a second. But this is a year that I feel like had been brewing for a while. And so everybody knew that there was going to be a re-release, a reimagining, a remake of Stephen King's It. And so unlike the original television miniseries that was in those ratings constraints of, you know, basic TV and everything, this was going to be an R-rated affair. And so I would imagine everybody circled their calendars about that, as did I. But there was also another film that was coming out, which was going to be an amalgamation, final turn of the wheel, last time around, seeing the Horn of Eld on the goddamn socials. Anyway, we will get to the Dark Tower film here in a little bit, because boy have I most definitely talked at length, and ad nauseum is probably the better word, about the Dark Tower film. But let's just basically chronicle everything that happened in 2017. And so, as I said, things were brooding in 16 because, you know, they filmed most of these things, you know, in the year before, and then everything is going through, you know, post, edit, all these different things. And so, you know, the conceptualization of what this year was going to be for King in both print, big screen, and small screen, you know, like the preamble, all of the pieces being put in their proper places from all of these different factions of creators, was obviously that, I mean, I don't know how coordinated of an effort that it was, you know, but there had to have been awareness throughout, you know, the entertainment and the creative community that we were going to have this fucking blitzkrieg in 2017, more so than any other year before or after. Do you think there was a lot in 1983? God damn, man. 2017 had so much King stuff, it was literally tough to even take it all in. I still did, but nonetheless, I had a little bit more free time back then, you know, because I wasn't going to school and I was just, you know, working full-time on YouTube, and that's about it, you know? So the year actually kind of kicked off with a whimper, regrettably, and it's one of the only Sai King things that has never seen a physical release. Unfortunately, there are two other things this year that never saw a physical release, but I will get to those in a moment. So the year actually started out on June 22nd with a television show. Yeah, so anybody remember the Mist television series that was on Spike TV? It was planned to be a few different seasons, especially with the cliffhanger ending that we had at the end of the first 10 episodes. Yeah, did not really fare so well with the critics or with the fans, most notably the constant readers. The fact that this was very much, as I always say, another turn of the wheel, a different level of the tower. It was very much a reimagining in just about every capacity that you could think of, y'all. And completely brand new characters. I feel like still that some of the criticism was unwarranted, because I still found merits in the show. So it ran from June 22nd until August 24th, left us with this big cliffhanger ending, Horsemen of the Apocalypse, all kinds of crazy shit. So it was very much trying to Castle Rock this stuff and really just, you know, I mean, hey, you know, King was doing, you know, alternate dimensions and multiverses and things like that a long time before, you know, a lot of mainstream Hollywood was doing it as they are now. And, you know, you have South Park episodes bitching about the extent of the laziness of the multiverse. I don't know, I feel like you can take source material and bend it and repurpose it and stuff and still make stuff fairly interesting. It's happened before, you know, second season of Castle Rock, like, I loved Lizzie Kaplan's young version of Annie Wilkes. I thought that was tremendous, you know, so sometimes it can work to the benefit. But so that was what we started things out as in June. And then, unfortunately, just a couple months later, we had maybe one of the biggest disappointments of any Sai King adaptation that I can ever think of, and that is this fucker here. Yeah, the Dark Tower. And, you know, I like to look at things as objectively as possible. I'm not a fan of hate YouTubing, and I think that's one of the reasons why. Yeah, so, you know, Stuckman has this whole thing right now, Chris Stuckman, where he's like, I don't want to just shit on movies I review anymore, and so I'm not gonna, you know, do reviews unless, and so that's a whole other video. I don't even know if I'm gonna talk about that at length, but yeah, I feel like, you know, his extreme is the reaction to the other extreme, which is, like, hate culture is so hardcore, beloved, you know, that it's cool to hate. Whoa, it's cool to hate. If anybody's heard that Offspring song. And yeah, man, like, just taking a dump on things on YouTube and just blasting stuff as opposed to being somewhere in the middle, which is where I always try to be, because I have the journalistic background, and so I'm like, okay, I look at things as objectively as possible, and I try to find merits within, and it's really, really tough with me and the Dark Tower film. Now, I do like the actor who plays Jake. I thought he was pretty solid. I did not mind Idris. He's a tremendous actor, but this was very much one of the situations where I felt like the casting was forced to a degree, and just very deliberately going against type. And, you know, McConaughey, I was a little less impressed as, you know, Walter / Flag / Farson / you know, I mean, all of his different aliases, you know, over the course of everything that the Man in Black is. And so, but it was really, and despite the fact that, you know, Nicolas Arcel actually directed it fairly well, but the amalgamation factor just didn't work. The fact that it was factoring in like breaker stuff from like some of the later books, and yet, you know, I felt like the average audience goer who didn't know anything about these books would be fairly lost, and yet you also pissed off the hardcore fans like me. And so it's like when you try to be everything to everyone, like the Everclear song, you know, you end up being, you know, like hated by everyone, essentially, reviled. And so, yeah, this book, this film is, oh boy, it does not have a lot of positivity that you can really mention about it. Yeah, man, I was so disappointed with this film. And then also on top of that, you know, the fact that they tried doing Young Roland from Wizard and Glass and from The Gunslinger as a television series for Amazon, that didn't end up working out. Mike Flanagan is trying his damnedest to get one off the ground, and if anybody can, it's him. But the fact that he is still encountering a lot of difficulty just breaks my heart. But so that's what we had on August 4th, and one of the funniest videos I think I ever did with Cecil on the horror show that was Hail adjacent was where we walked out of the theater after watching The Dark Tower, and both of us were like, well, that's it for the Dark Tower cinematic universe. We were just so bummed out, but you know, hey, it is what it is, okay? But we pivoted to a much more amazing thing just a few days, like not even a week later. And that was the debut of this badassness. One of the best Sai King adaptations, whether for television or film, and that is the Mr. Mercedes show. Brendan Gleeson, Harry Treadaway, who had previously done, oh boy, I'm trying to remember the show. I believe it was either Showtime or maybe it was Cinemax. It was a show that had, oh boy, Eva Green, and I want to say Hartnett, and it was like classic monster related. Anyway, Treadaway is great in this as Brady, and even though Bill Hodges is never mentioned as being Irish, man, Brendan Gleeson is so tremendous in this show. It has a Rotten Tomatoes of, well, actually I should say the Mist series was 60% Rotten Tomatoes, 54 out of 100 on Metacritic, but Mr. Mercedes, far better numbers, 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, 71 out of 100 on Metacritic. There were 10 episodes of this on the AT&T Audience Network, and yet that is a now defunct platform. It was when AT&T and DirecTV, I think, were like a part of the same parent company or whatever. But yeah, so it has since pivoted. All 3 of its seasons have pivoted over to Peacock TV, which is the NBC Universal streamer, and so that's where you can check out all 3 seasons of this. They adapted the entire Bill Hodges trilogy, albeit in an order that I feel like made a little bit more sense. So they shifted Finders Keepers to the 3rd season, and they bridged the 2 Brady stories together for seasons 1 and 2. This is one of the few instances where I think maybe they actually expanded on the source material. Seriously, it's that good. There have been murmurings that Jack Bender, the guy behind this series, is actually trying to figure out how to fold in the recently released Holly book that King did as a 4th season of the show. I don't know if that would mean just the actress from that series reprising her role, because she also did the audiobook for Holly, or if it would be someone completely different. Would you bring back and, you know, multiverse that shizzle? Because at the end of the series, you know, spoilers, you don't have what happens to Hodges happen at the end of the books, and that's just minor spoilers. I'm not going to go fully into it. So, I don't know. I was always hopeful that they were going to adapt for a 4th season of the show, the If It Bleeds, the biggest of the novellas from King's release there, which also had Holly and, you know, Jerome and his sister and everything. So, I don't know, man, but this series was such a breath of fresh air after the first 2 King releases being pretty bunk, man, in the Mist TV series and obviously the atrocity that was Dark Tower film. And so then things got really, really interesting. And that's because we had this monstrosity unleashed upon the world. It, by Andy Muschietti, also co-produced with his sister Barbara, became one of the, I think it's the highest grossing horror film of all time, unadjusted for inflation, because I believe that distinction still resides with The Exorcist. But man, this book was a behemoth already, and yet it was interesting how they condensed it down to just the half with the kids, despite the fact that, you know, King's original source material, just like the miniseries, jumps back and forth a little bit. And so I love this film, but I don't know if I love it quite as much as everybody else does. It did gangbusters at the box office, though. You know, it did over $700 million, if I recall correctly. So this was released on September 8th. The budget was between $35 and $40 million. This grossed over 700, 701.8 to be exact. So, man, that is most definitely just a monster of an achievement, monstrous achievement, ginormous status, man. And yes, I do really appreciate this. It's got a great cast. Sophia, Finn Wolfhard, I mean, all the kids are really, really well cast. I still have such a soft spot for the miniseries, though, that I'm kind of torn and conflicted. Skarsgård is good. Different take on Pennywise, though, compared to what Tim Curry did, so that's another thing to bear in mind. But, yeah, man, I mean, that's just kind of the way the cookie crumbled. Now, the one thing that, I'm supposed to be doing this shit in order, Fuego, but yet you're mucking it up, suck. You're mucking it up. And I guess that's because of the fact that I am not the biggest fan of this, so let's pivot real quick back to on May 17th, we had the release of Gwendy's Button Box. And so this was one of two different collaborations that King released this past year, in 2017. It was with him and his buddy Richard Chismar, who runs Cemetery Dance, and I have tons of their editions. I have the entire trilogy. I have all of the Doubleday years. I have it. I have so many amazing special edition releases from these guys. This is a book that's grown on me over the years, but I must admit, I still wouldn't put it anywhere above like maybe B-, C+, because, I don't like the Richard Ferris stuff, especially with the reproportioning of what they do with this RF stand-in and what you can kind of, who you assume he is initially, and then, I don't know, multiverse, and I'm not going to spoil anything, especially with how off the rails the book goes in its third and final entry, Gwendy's final task. But, man, this book was just, it's another Castle Rock story, but it's just very simple and doesn't bring enough interesting ideas to the table for me to really just, give it a major recommendation. I know they were trying to make this into something at one point too, and just like all the other adaptations. So yes, this came out, it was a very small little novella, as you guys can tell. And that's actually because of the fact that just a few months later, in September, we had the release of another collaboration, this one with his son Owen, and this is Sleeping Beauties. This is another one that they said they were going to turn into a television series on AMC, similar to The Institute. Nothing ever became of it. Owen was actually supposed to be part of the writing team and the production team and whatnot, so he was going to be a producer on it along with his father, but we haven't heard anything. They did make it into a comic book, though, that I felt like really streamlined the story here significantly better. You've got all the women in the world, they start falling asleep, and if you awaken them, it is like rage zombie status, something out of the Crazies, where they will violently attack and kill and everything until you put them down. And yet there is one woman who mysteriously shows up in this Midwestern town, and Appalachian town to be specific, and I guess that's still considered the Midwest. I'm bad with geography in that part of the United States. But, so, yeah, man, this book was... it's too long for me. I love long King books, but, very similar to problems I had with Under the Dome, where I felt like it was a large cast of characters, but while they were fairly well developed, they weren't as memorable, in comparison with stuff like Needful Things or Salem's Lot or obviously It. Some of these other stories where King has these huge towns with all of these wacky casts of characters and whatnot, I still find merits to this book, but it really, really drags in its middle portion specifically. I'm not the biggest fan of how it kind of, like, this is one of the instances where I don't know if King necessarily knew how to end it, and so maybe he leaned more heavily on Owen for that, and yet, while it is a more concise ending, I don't know, this is a very strange book. I appreciate it upon rereads, because I've reread it twice now, a little bit more than when it was initially put out in 2017, but I don't know, I do feel like the reason I enjoyed the comic book significantly more is because it did trim some of that proverbial fat, condense some things, and I think it would work fairly well as a television series if they do ever actually get around to it. So now we get to the last couple things which came out this particular year, and I'm just double checking my notes here, everybody, and that's because these were honestly two of the best Stephen King adaptations that I can think of in recent memory. And they're both on Netflix, which is even crazier, and neither of them have actually seen a friggin' physical release. It is just mind-numbingly infuriating that this is the case. But on September 29th, we had Gerald's Game, Mike Flanagan's first foray into adapting Stephen King. He would go on to do Dr. Sleep. He would attempt to do Revival. He's attempting to do The Dark Tower. Midnight Mass is still the most Cy King thing that he has ever done, and if you haven't seen Midnight Mass, bam, my God, it is so exceptional. All the monologues. Give me all the monologues, man. But, yeah, Gerald's Game is exceptional. Carla Gugino, I never know how to properly pronounce her name. I need to watch an interview with her so I can see how it's properly pronounced. But she is so exceptional as this character who, you know, essentially, I mean, it's bookended with Dolores Claiborne, which a lot of people should, you know, try to recall. But her performance as this woman just handcuffed is so, it was always considered to be the unfilmable of the Sai King books, but yet Mike Flanagan somehow found a way. So much introspection. He made it grisly with her attempted escapes. The fact that they even included the Moon Man, which I didn't think was necessarily going to transpire. No, not the MTV stand-in for their award shows. But yeah, guys, I'm still pissed that I don't have a... Now, granted, I subscribe to Netflix, and I throw it on from time to time because it's one of the best King adaptations, especially of the new century. But, man, the fact that we don't have a physical release of this is just mind-boggling. But Gerald's Game standalone book, September 29th, it was released on Netflix. And then the following month, in October, on the 20th, we had 1922, also Netflix. Thomas Jane as our lead character in this, a man who plots with his son to kill his wife, succeeds, and then it is all about the building guilt in not just him, but far more so his son. The novella from Full Dark No Stars is tremendous. This is not one that I feel like leapfrogs in quality, like with Mr. Mercedes or with certain other adaptations, but this is just as good. You know, Thomas Jane is so great in the lead role. The actor who plays his son gives just the brooding guilt, so much pathos, and just so much, like, I don't know, just he's so beriddled with it, and yet, whereas, you know, Thomas Jane is far more stoic in it, and just wondering what is going down with his rotting wife down in the well. It's so good, man. I adore this, and so, yeah, I mean, let's just get back to box office numbers before we pivot to the final bit of our programming here, which is going to be like the argument back and forth for which is the more prolific. So we heard that, you know, adjusted for inflation, the $62 million for Sai King and his films that were released in 1983, those three films would have amounted to almost $192 million in today's doll hairs. But even though The Dark Tower was trash, you know, it had a budget of $66 million, which is actually fairly meager, you know, because of the fact that Dark Tower isn't like a super well-known property as far as the mainstream goes. Constant readers, Tower junkies, sure. Those in the know about Sai King, they know that there's 8 books. They have clamored for, there's comics, there's all these different things. And so, yeah, Dark Tower, for those in the know, prolific. But as far as like the casual reader as opposed to the constant reader, yeah, they're unaware. And so $66 million was a relatively modest budget for this sort of thing. It did show at times, unfortunately, but I still feel like from a visual standpoint, despite my major gripes with the story, they did well enough with what they could. Dixie Pig looks solid, you know, when they're actually, you know, going across, you know, those areas of Midworld and stuff, it doesn't look too bad. You know, I think they filmed in South Africa, if I remember correctly, but it still made $113 million at the box office. Now, if you include in promotion, that probably wouldn't be considered profitable, but still, I mean, you combine the $113 million with the almost $702 million, that means King did over $800 million in box office at 2017, in comparison with the adjusted for inflation of inflation for just below $200 million. So he more than quadrupled that, and I think that that is something very much to keep in mind. And so you're like, okay, so Sai King had 6 different releases in 1983. And then in 2017, we had the 2 books, and then we had the 4 films, so we're at 6 already, and we had the 2 different television series that came out. And so that is a whopping 8. I can count, guys. That is a whopping 8 different King projects between himself and the adaptations that all came out in 2017. So we've got 6 versus 8, all right? So yeah, obviously, we know what is ahead as far as the numbers go, okay? But this is where things are going to change as far as my argument for perhaps why 83 is still a more important year for Sai King. So why 83 then in comparison? Because honestly, if we're playing the numbers game, you know, as I just mentioned, you had 8 different releases, and it was releases spanning both small screen, big screen, and as far as, you know, like printed stuff from Sai King goes. And so, yeah, you would think 8 and the box office comparison, the fact that, you know, this just steamrolled from a financial standpoint in comparison. But I really think that, to quote Slater's son from Dazed and Confused, it's quality over quantity, man. And yet, it's even tough for me to pronounce that as like the defining factor in this, you know, like argument, this debate, more so than an argument, obviously, because, you know, as I always say on here, art is subjective. It's something that is mentioned from the more just well-rounded and saner people within this sphere, within this entertainment discourse community. But, I mean, yeah, so you look at quality versus quantity, okay? So, okay, Christine, you know, very, very good book, okay? Pet Sematary, exceptional, one of his top 3 ever. Cycle of the Werewolf, underrated. Unfortunately, I think more people probably know the Silver Bullet film than those who have actually checked out the source material. And then Cujo, which I think is a solid King adaptation, 3, maybe 3.5 star. Dead Zone is like 4.5 stars. The Christine film, though, as I said, while I appreciate it, you could tell that that was Carpenter's pay gig so that he could actually be able to make The Thing, which, if I remember correctly, came out the same year, or like right around the same time as he's actually gone on record to say that. And while there's some charm to the Christine film, that's one of the few that they're trying to remake right now that I'm pretty okay with it, in all honesty. So that is kind of a 50-50 bag, and yet there's no weak links in there as far as all 6 of those, whether, you know, print or in adaptation form. And then you look at 17, I would say one of the biggest defining things for me is that you have such iconic stuff going on in the print side of things, like his own voice as opposed to those trying to reinterpret and adapt it, whereas, you know, both of these books in 2017, as I mentioned, between, you know, the aforementioned, both of these being collaborations and both of these being not super impressive, at least for me. And to pit those against, you know, one, if not, you know, 2, maybe 3, I mean, one of his best ever, and then in comparison you also have, you know, 2 of his stronger early 80s releases. I mean, I don't know, I feel like that means that the print side obviously wins out in 83 versus 2017. It gets a little tougher though when you get to the actual screen stuff, because of the fact that, I mean, obviously from a box office standpoint we know what rings true, but I would personally say that 1922, Gerald's Game, It, the Mr. Mercedes television series, those are both significantly better, at least in my personal opinion, okay, than Cujo or Christine. Now, I don't know if any of them hold a candle to the Dead Zone, you know, but so in that particular essence, you know, as far as adaptations go, I mean, it's true you have some stinkers like, you know, The Mist and, you know, The Dark Tower, but honestly, everything else between all of the other adaptations, so I would say from a film standpoint and from an adaptation standpoint in general, I would say stuff is stronger in 2017, and there's more of it too, between Andy Muschietti's It remake, between Gerald's Game in 1922, between Mr. Mercedes. You have 4 stellar adaptations of Cy King stuff. Now granted, you have 2 bad ones in The Mist and The Dark Tower, but I would actually give the edge in this department, and I'm curious what everybody has to say about this. You know, I would say the edge goes in the adaptation department to 2017, and I would say the edge goes in the literary department without a shadow of a doubt to 1983. So this is where I, as opposed to saying a final proclamation and decision, I'm going to leave it up to everybody here as we are finishing out the proceedings, because I want to know what you guys think wins out. But this is the final little, I guess, factoid, you know, because I already gave my quality versus quantity, man. A few other statistics being that, so in 2017, as far as the #1 stuff of the year, because New York Times actually tracks these particular factoids, so of the top 100 books as far as sales go in the entire year, King actually had 3 different entries in there. So he had The Gunslinger. Obviously there was some interest in the fact that the Dark Tower film was coming out that August. That clocked in at number 92 as far as the 2017 numbers go. Sleeping Beauties was at number 80. And then It, yeah, lots of interest because of the fact that that film's coming out in September. It was at number 12. So in 2017, you had 3 different King books in the top 100 sellers according to the New York Times of the entire year. And yet, you only had a #1 for Sleeping Beauties for a single week, October 15th. Yeah. In comparison, you had Pet Sematary in 1983. Pet Sematary topped the charts of the New York Times bestsellers list for 6 weeks. Yeah, a whopping 6 weeks. I'm trying to get the exact number here. And also something else before I forget. Besides that, as far as the most popular books released in 1983 on Goodreads, which I know didn't exist back then, but it still clocks those sort of numbers for those releases. Yeah, we're talking, it is the #2 most popular book according to Goodreads of anything released in 1983. And also Pet Sematary topped the New York Times bestseller list from November 13th through December 18th. So for 6 weeks in 1983, Stephen King was the #1 selling author in the country, according to the New York Times. So I feel like that's another big factoid. And so it's like, okay, it's tough to like climb to, you know, the top and to, you know, put the crown on your head and be the king of horror and all that other stuff. And yet, I don't know, some say that it's actually even tougher to make a comeback. That is one of those sort of, you know, relative arguments as far as some people think, hey, to get there initially is one of the toughest things. But there's others who, you know, like to debate and stress the fact that they're like, no, it's like after kind of a fall from grace, not that King fell from grace, but maybe as far as mainstream affinity, yeah, he most definitely did. There were some very bad adaptations in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And so when you started getting quality stuff again, you know, that's where the tide was obviously turning, and you were getting more care and consideration put into it. Now, granted, you still had the likes of like Darabont doing things like The Mist in '07 and whatnot, but I mean, and I even like things like, you know, the Big Driver adaptation and you know, A Good Marriage, things that went a little more under the radar in the early 2010s and stuff. But I mean, I don't know. There was definitely a very deliberate resurgence, and the fact that not only was there this resurgence of releases, but the fact that the public embraced it in 2017 to the manner in which they did. So that's something where it's a coin toss between, you know, is it tougher to get the crown as the king of horror, or is it tougher to reclaim it, you know, the return of the king, as I've said previously. But the final little just thing that I'm going to put out there, okay? Topping the Billboard chart, topping the New York Times book charts for hardcovers and everything, having 3 profitable releases in theaters. You know, there was only one profitable one, being the Gangbusters that Andy Muschietti's first It did. But what I was thinking about as I was about to film this video is the fact that so granted, there were, you know, like a ton more adaptations in both big screen and small screen for Sai King in 2017. Like 6 releases, you know, double what you had in theaters in 1983. However, by 2017, you had so many other options for entertainment. By that time, you had streaming. You had tons of cable channels still. It's still a thing to some, you know. Also, you have, you know, like more network channels, things like that. You have Fox. You have, you know, UPN was a thing for a while. I don't know if they still are. CCW. So you have more network channels than you did in. You have far more channels between network and cable together in comparison with what you had in 1983. Plus, you factor in the streaming. Plus, you factor in the fact that there are so many more films actually released to theaters by 2017, and even more so probably today. Although the actors' strike and the pandemic affected things a little bit, but still. I mean, by 2017 compared to 1983, 4 more films being released to both the big and the small screen. And that's on top of all of the additional cable channels and streaming. And so, yeah, of course you're going to have more options for Sai King adaptations to take in because of the fact that there is so much more media, just absolutely just the assault of it constantly. You know, the media blitz going to dry your eyes, as Mike Ness from Social D would say. And so, yeah, man, I mean, I understand why there would be so much more in 2017 in comparison with 83. But I feel like King was able to really just command so much attention and yet as I'm even saying it, it's like, okay, so he could command so much attention in 83, and yet in 2017 with so many other options, so many other distractions, so many other different means of entertaining yourselves, he was still able to put all of those things out, and 2/3 of them were very high quality. So I think the jury's out on this, man. The verdict is not in. I can't really specify as I think about it. To quote Lisa Pecci, if I'm not butchering her name, she's a member of the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. If anybody is interested, I'm the sole admin on there. I try to get on there as much as I can. It's a little tougher since going back to school, but she made very obvious mention of the fact that, without the groundwork laid by King's work in 1983, his biggest year to date, and his biggest year until 2017. There would be no 2017 if not for, just how prolific and, just in every essence of the public consciousness and the zeitgeist that King became by 1983. And yet, I don't know, there's something impressive about reclaiming that crown and the re-solidification of his prominence and his presence. And so I thought that I was going to go 100, I thought I was going to go hard into 83 by the end of this video, and yet I really want some very decisive and concise opinions from all of you guys, because at the end of this video, I don't really think that I can. It's like an apples to oranges sort of situation. You know, sometimes I need that vitamin C, sometimes I need, you know, that brain food. Apple a day keeps the doctor away and all that shizzle. So I don't know, man. I can't really, since it's like saying which of your children you love more or whatever. Thank goodness I don't have any, so I don't have to make that sort of distinction. But yeah, I can't really definitively say. Now, once again, from a literary standpoint, I personally prefer 1983 100%, and from an adaptation standpoint, I prefer 2017 100%. And yet, to argue which one was bigger for him, it's really tough to quantify, man, and I don't necessarily think that you can actually make a concise decision. But for those who aren't going to be as wishy-washy as me, you know, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which of the 2 years you think was more prolific, more important, and more importantly, elaborate. Tell me why. You know, tell me why. I would really like to know why. You know, just hear your argument, your debate for why one or the other, and also, like, you know, what was your favorite of each of these two very heavily separated king eras? I mean, we're talking there were 34 years between these 2 years, and the fact that the man is still just doing gangbusters, it's pretty impressive, man. And you know, much love, obviously, to Sai King, and much love to all of you for checking out this video. I extend a grande gracias. I've been Jaime En Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, where really the only stuff besides the occasional hail video that I've been doing is my Rapido Fuego reviews. So they're just little short, about a minute or so, bite-sized reviews of things that whenever I get the chance to check out something in the theater, I always try to at least give some very brief, concise thoughts on it. And the easy thing about those is it doesn't really entail editing or overlaying or anything like that. And so, you know, with being so busy with being back full-time in school, it's a way for me to at least give some thoughts and some, you know, impressions and stuff, and, you know, just like stay very much in the inner goings of currency and current things, as opposed to, you know, just not doing anything at all. Obviously, go and check out youtube.com/The Horror Show channel. That's where I'm still as involved with Cecil, Roberts, and the gang as I can be, depending upon scheduling. That's where you will find a playlist for Stephen King focused videos, I believe is what we called it, or Stephen King themed videos. I'll link to that in the description box below. That'll probably be significantly easier for those who want to check out that if you're unfamiliar. Previous videos on here that I've done since starting back on school was King on Screen, which is a great documentary. The most recent Children of the Corn, which is on Shudder. Also Pet Sematary Bloodlines, which is a prequel that is on Paramount+. But both of those got physical releases. We also did The Boogeyman, which was released last year. This is a year in 2024 of some uncertainty, because besides the You Like It Darker, we're not really too sure as far as distinctive release dates for Life of Chuck, or if we're ever going to even see the new version of Salem's Lot. I mean, there's a lot up in the air with Sai King right now, which, you know, when you think about just how rapid fire everything was going in 2017, and then in 18 when you had stuff like Castle Rock, and there was so much going on for a few years there, and, you know, It Part 2 coming out in 19, I really felt like, you know, we did kind of reach the top of the hill, and it has kind of careened down, you know, in the last couple of years, at least, most notably post-pandemic. So, yeah, that's about all that I have to say on the topic of El Rey, as I so affectionately call him. I am trying to get together a Holly ranking video. All of her books that she has been a part of, the Hodges trilogy, obviously, The Outsider, If It Bleeds, her personal book. That's possibly the next thing that I'm getting together, along with a video just kind of discussing my impressions of the Arizona State course literature of Stephen King. It's an English class, upper level, and honestly, since I took it online, this would be my recommendation one way or another as to if I think those who might be interested in attending Arizona State, if they would like to seek out that class, being an online course and everything. And so, yeah, guys, that's going to be the end of everything for me today. And once again, gracias, danke, arigato, merci. Thank you so very much. Say thank you. I hope that we have been well met. We share more of this palaver sooner rather than later, until that Wheel of Ka comes around once more. And hasta luego, constant readers, you know, casual readers, viewers alike, and yes, all that I can obviously say at the end of this video, as I'm kind of ad-libbing this one compared to my usual spiel, is read Stephen King. I always end things with that. And, you know, the two of all of these that I would most definitely, the most wholeheartedly recommend are the two from '83, Pet Sematary and Cycle of the Werewolf.